Hi everyone, welcome to the lecture on pediatric endodontics part 1. This is a 3-part lecture series, and in this particular lecture we are going to look at the indications, contraindications and technique for performing the direct and indirect pulp capping. And also, in order to understand why these techniques are used, we will also look at how the pulp reacts to different types of stimulus. So let's begin. Now, basically, when you talk about pulp, these are the list of treatment options that are available for us. And the first three that you see are commonly referred to as deep caries management or vital pulp therapy. So in today's lecture, we are going to look at direct and indirect pulp capping. And in the next lecture, you will be looking at pulpotomy and pulpectomy. And the third lecture series would be on apexogenesis and apexification. To begin with, we must understand that uh, pulp and dentine are both coming from the same embryological origin, and therefore they are commonly now referred to as pulp dentine complex because they cannot exist without each other. So the dentine gets its moisture, its nerval innervations from pulp, and the dentine protects the pulp in return. So these two histological entities are now considered as a single unit and referred to as pulp dentine complex. In this picture, you will realize that this portion is the pulp, this is the tertiary dentine, and this is your physiological dentine. So we will also now look at what is this tertiary dentine. This is also dentine, this is also dentine, but if you see here, this is more dense, irregularly arranged tubules. That is why they look more darker and different than the physiological dentine. So let's see what this tertiary dentine is all about. So tertiary dentine is basically a process where the pulp tries to repair the dentinal tubules, the odontoblast, which have been damaged due to various stimulus. And therefore, this is the reason it is also called as reactive or reparative dentine. And this only comes as a reaction of pulp to various kind of stimulus like atresion, caries, or even by restorative dental procedures. Even the use of burr without water spray could heat up the dentine and damage the odontoblast which are present in the pulp. So the tertiary dentine, the quantity and the architecture or the quality depends on what kind of stimulus the pulp has received, and therefore intensity and duration of the stimulus decides what kind of tertiary dentine would be formed in terms of its quality and quantity. These tertiary dentine may have tubules continuous with those of secondary dentine, and these tubules are spare in number and irregularly arranged, or they may not have any tubules at all. And we will see how these tertiary dentine originate from. Okay, and the cells forming the tertiary dentine lines its surface or become included into the dentine, and the latter case this is called as osteodentine. So reactionary tertiary dentine is also subclassified as reactionary or reparative. That means a reaction to stimulus or a reparative response to the damage. To the stimulus, if the stimulus is mild, there's a low grade inflammation of the pulp, the odontoblast secretory activity increases, and the odontoblasts which are already present will form the tertiary dentine. In contrast, if the stimulus is intense and there is a rapid intense inflammation of the pulp, the odontoblast which are underlying these inflammatory response, they die off, and then they are replaced by stem progenitor cells in the pulp tissue, and these cells differentiate into odontoblast like cells, and these odontoblast like cells secrete they initiate the dentinogenesis, and then you have a tertiary dentine formation. So this process is called as reparative dentinogenesis, and this process is called as reactionary dentinogenesis. So there will be a difference between the structure and the quality of the dentine that is formed, the reactionary dentine that is formed. Now, the reaction of pulp of a primary teeth is different from the reaction of pulp from the permanent teeth. So in the primary teeth, the enlarged apical foramen, there is an abundant blood supply to the pulp, and this demonstrates a typical inflammatory response to a stimulus as compared to the permanent, where the apical foramens are restricted. There is a reduced blood supply, and this favors a calcific response. So you'll normally find pulp calcification in permanent pulp and more inflammation in a primary pulp. Second, the reparative dentine formation is more extensive and irregular as compared to the permanent, where reparative dentine formation is less. The dentine innervation is less in primary teeth and it is more in permanent teeth, and this is the reason why when you're doing cavity preparation in a primary tooth, the child may not complain of sensitivity until you reach the pulp, and suddenly you find the child complains of pain and you're already touching the pulp. This does not happen in permanent teeth because the innervation, density of innervation is very high. So as soon as you reach the dentine, the patients will complain of sensitivity. In primary pulp, there is a localization of infection, and inflammation is poorer because of the abundant blood supply. So the infection kind of spreads faster, and therefore you will have more swelling as compared to the permanent. In permanent, the inflammation and infection is more or less localized, and therefore in permanent teeth you will have severe irreversible pulpitis or severe pain, while in children you will have one episode of serious severe pain, and then the pain will subside on taking painkiller, and the extraoral swelling will come. So this is the difference between how the pulp of primary teeth differs from the permanent teeth when it is tested by a stimulus. So it is important for us to have the proper examination, do a proper examination, and to have a proper diagnosis, because having a proper diagnosis will guide us to the right treatment. So when you're doing the examination, you need to have all these in mind. So first you take the pain history. How does the pain start? How long does it last? And how is it relieved? Okay, so these pain history will tell you, direct you to the status of the pulp, whether the pulp is damaged beyond repair or it can still be repaired. Then you look at extraoral examination. Here you're looking at extraoral swelling and lymph nodes involvement, which would indicate that the pulp has been damaged irreversibly. Then you look at intraoral examination. Here you have to look at the depth of the caries. You have to really gently probe this area in this radiograph here. You have to probe the area to see how deep it is and if there is any bleeding coming from the pulp, right? So this will indicate the pulp is already exposed and you need to do some kind of pulp therapy. Intraoral examination, you should also look at the vestibule area for any draining sinuses, especially in the primary dentition. Then investigations, you must take a radiograph for all deep carious lesions, okay, whether it is painful or not painful. You have to take a IOPA compulsory for any tooth with deep carious lesion. Why? Because if you see here in this particular radiograph, you have a deep carious lesion and then you have extensive internal resorption, and the treatment for this is only extraction. So you cannot do any kind of pulp therapy or any restorative treatment. If you look at this radiograph here, you see the caries, and the caries has gone onto the root surface. So this basically becomes non-restorable tooth and indicated for extraction. Similarly here, if you see IOPA, if you see there is extensive root resorption and there is an extensive radiolucency in this area, so this tooth is indicated for extraction. This tooth here has a quite deep caries and the roots are also having minimum of 2/3 length. So this tooth can be saved by either doing any kind of vital pulp therapy, or even if the pulp has undergone irreversible change, we can still do pulpectomy. So this is how intraoral examination, the investigation of intraoral radiograph has to be done very thoroughly. Then after the investigations, you have to make a diagnosis, and from the diagnosis you have to make a treatment plan. Okay, So now when you talk about pain history, you must understand the difference between reversible and irreversible pulpitis, because there is a difference in the intensity and the type of pain. Now the pain of reversible pulpitis, which is typically noted as sharp shooting, comes from A delta fibers, and these A delta fibers are mostly present at the periphery of the pulp. So as soon as the caries enters the enamel, the dentine, and the inflammation is reaches the pulp, the A delta fibers are the first nerves to get stimulated, and they give you a sharp shooting pain. So a patient who is complaining of a sharp shooting pain, you must understand that the inflammation has reached the pulp and is still confined to the outer surface of the pulp. So I'm talking about inflammation, I'm not talking about bacteria. Okay, so the reaction of the dentine would be to stimulate the pulp, and the A delta fibers will get stimulated and you will have pain. Now irreversible pulpitis will give you deep dull aches, and these deep dull aches are transmitted by C fibers, which are more into the body of the pulp. So if the patient is complaining of dull ache, that means the inflammation has already reached the body of the pulp, and this kind of pain requires some kind of pulp therapy. That means you have to remove the pulp or do something to the pulp. So remember, the reversible is A delta fibers, sharp shooting pain. We can still not touch the pulp and save the tooth, and if you have irreversible pulpitis, they will stimulate the C fibers, and the C fibers will give you a dull ache. So it is very important when you're taking the pain history to decide what kind of pain it is, for you to come to a conclusion whether what part of the pulp is involved, and it will help you in making a diagnosis, and in turn your treatment would be accurate. So when you are making a pulpal diagnosis, this is the progression of inflammation in the pulp. So when the pulp is normal, there is quick response, that is momentary pain to hot and cold, and there will be no pain per se. Okay, so you eat an ice cream, you may have a momentary pain, okay, but the pulp means the pulp is normal. Now if you have a sharp response which is not lingering and there is no spontaneous pain, no spontaneous pain means the pain that does not arise by itself. So it is basically provoked pain. So if you have a provoked pain which does not linger and it's only a sharp response, the pulp status is in reversible damage. Reversible, that means you can reverse the damage. But if the response with lingering sensation and there is a history of spontaneous pain, that means the pain just starts on its own, most typically seen at night when the patient is gets up from sleep at night because of the pain, spontaneous pain. Okay, so this is irreversible pulpitis, and it could be symptomatic or asymptomatic. So symptomatic means there will be history of dull pain lasting over a period of 2 hours, 3 hours, and the patient has to take medication to relieve the pain. Or it could be asymptomatic, which is only diagnosed from the radiograph. So if you have a deep carious lesion and you take a radiograph and you see internal resorption, which indicates the pulp is irreversibly damaged, and it is asymptomatic because it is not having any pain. Then lastly, you can have a necrotic pulp which will not be responsive to either pain, which will not be responsive because all the pulp tissue has died, so there will be no pain from hot and cold, and it may or may not have pain on its own because the pulp is necrotic. The pulp may appear asymptomatic, but it will always be associated with a deep caries lesion or history of trauma. Two things you must keep in mind. So what is the clinical decision making? Because we are dealing with primary teeth and young permanent teeth, the treatment options for the pulp therapy are not the same. Okay, it is very important, and this is where you all make mistakes in your OSCE exam and in your modified essay questions. Okay, you always tend to overlap the treatment options. So in this particular slide, I want you to learn what you can do and you cannot do. For example, you can do indirect pulp capping for both permanent and primary teeth. But when it comes to direct pulp capping, it is recommended not to do direct pulp capping for primary teeth, but you can do direct pulp capping only if there is a mechanical exposure in a permanent teeth, for example, trauma, and the apex is open. So in this case, you can do direct pulp capping and protect the pulp, and the apex will form because the pulp is still vital. And if the apex is closed, you must do an root canal treatment. Of course, this depends on the amount of mechanical exposure, but in primary teeth, direct pulp capping is not really advocated because we really don't know how the pulp will respond to the biomaterial that we use for direct pulp capping. But with newer dental materials, pulp capping agents coming into the picture, we may also be able to do direct pulp capping. But the rule of thumb is don't do direct pulp capping in primary teeth. Then in primary teeth, you don't do apexogenesis. I repeat, in primary teeth, you don't do apexogenesis. But in permanent teeth, you can do apexogenesis, especially if the apex is open and pulp is vital. This is the only criteria for apexogenesis. Otherwise, you cannot do apexogenesis. So in permanent teeth, you can do apexogenesis if the apex is open and the pulp is vital. And this is how you do cervical pulpotomy or cervix pulpotomy. This you will learn in the next lecture. Then you can perform pulpotomy in primary teeth only by using ferric sulfate or laser, but not by formocresol anymore. We are not using formocresol anymore. I repeat, pulpotomy in primary teeth is done by ferric sulfate. This is the gold standard now. But in the permanent, you can do pulpotomy by using calcium hydroxide, MTA or biodentine. You are not using ferric sulfate in the permanent teeth. So don't confuse ferric sulfate on this side. All right. Remember, in permanent teeth, pulpotomy can be done by calcium hydroxide, MTA or biodentine, but you cannot use formocresol or ferric sulfate. Similarly, pulpotomy can be done using calcium hydroxide, MTA and biodentine in primary teeth. So this three can be used here, but this one cannot be used here. All right. Then of course you can do pulpectomy in primary teeth, and this parallel treatment is root canal treatment in permanent teeth when the apex is closed. But when the apex is open, then you have to perform something called as apexification. But there is no you cannot do apexification in a primary teeth. Okay, right. So clearing my throat there. So in primary teeth, you don't do apexification, you don't do apexogenesis, you don't do direct pulp capping. All right. In permanent teeth, you can do all this. So remember, this one is a really important to help you in your MEQs and your OSCEs. So let's look at the direct and indirect pulp capping. Really logical. If you place a biomaterial over the exposed pulp, it becomes a direct pulp capping. But if you have a dentine, a layer of dentine, 0.5 millimeter, 1 millimeter, and then you put your biomaterial, then it becomes an indirect pulp capping. Okay, so now we will look at each of these little more closely. Indirect pulp capping, defined as a procedure in which the non-remineralizable carious tissue is removed and a thin layer of caries is left behind in the deeper sides of the cavity, where complete removal would result in pulp exposure. So you can only decide this by looking at a radiograph. So in the radiograph, if you see the caries is approaching pulp, but there is no history of irreversible pulpitis, then better not to remove the whole pulp, whole carious dentine, because you will expose the pulp and you have to do pulpotomy or pulpectomy later. So the treatment will become more complicated, more expensive for the patient, and the prognosis will also reduce as soon as you touch the pulp. So indirect pulp capping is very useful there. So indirect pulp capping, you remove the infected dentine and you leave behind the affected dentine. This we have already seen in the restorative dentistry lecture. Why there is what is the difference between the two? So indications, like I said, when you're performing indirect pulp capping, right, we have to ensure that the pulp is normal or at the most having signs of reversible pulpitis. Okay, that means if you remove the carious dentine, that means you remove the cause of inflammation, the cause of infection, the pulp can heal by itself. So it is reversible pulpitis. So any signs which can give you an indication of pulp necrosis, in those cases you cannot do pulpectomy. In those cases you cannot do indirect pulp capping. And of course, the contraindications are any signs of irreversible pulpitis. That means there is a nocturnal pain or there is lingering pain, then you cannot do clinical examination. If you have a discolored crown which is indicative of pulpal necrosis, cannot do. If you have a draining sinus, you cannot do direct pulp capping. If you have an excess mobility, loss of tooth attachment because of the infection exiting the pulp through the apical foramen into the bone, and then the loss of attachment has happened, cannot do direct pulp capping, because the intention of direct pulp capping is to protect the remaining pulp, giving it an opportunity to heal by itself. Okay, so if the pulp itself is damaged, irreversibly damaged, cannot repair, then we cannot do indirect pulp capping. Alright, so here the rationale is to reduce the hyperemia, to remineralize the part of the carious dentine, reduce the amount of bacteria, promote reparative dentine formation, and maintain the vitality of the pulp. So it's a very, very important treatment option in deep caries management. So how do you do it? This slide basically tells you how to do it, but you must remember the key point is ensure the wall of your preparation is caries free, so that your bonding of your restorative material and the wall of your cavity preparation is a very tight bond, so there is no chances of micro leakage. And when there is no opportunity for micro leakage, any bacteria which we have not removed at the base of the cavity will ultimately die off, and the pulp will have an opportunity to deposit reparative dentine. Okay, so make sure the walls are absolutely caries free. The dento-enamel junction on the on the cavity walls should be caries free, and then you can leave any amount, you can leave about 1 mm of caries dentine at the bottom. And when we say caries dentine at the base of the cavity, we are mostly looking at affected dentine. But studies have shown that even if you leave infected dentine at the base of your cavity preparation and you cover it up with calcium hydroxide, hard setting calcium hydroxide paste, then there are still chances the pulp will recover, and these chances are very high. So a very good diagnostic radiograph will help you to perform this treatment, which will be low in cost for the patient, less complex for you, and with very good prognosis. So this basically, this slide basically tells you how a small carious opening, okay, can lead to a very extensive carious spread with chances of pulpal exposure. So here the caries excavation has been performed, and it is quite deep in this particular area. This particular area is now covered by your hard setting calcium hydroxide, and the cavity is restored with composite. Of course, this calcium hydroxide has to be protected by a layer of GIC, glass ionomer cement, and then you can put the composite, and then you can observe the tooth periodically for any symptoms of irreversible pulpitis, where you will have to change the treatment for a root canal. But the prognosis of this treatment is very good. So once you do indirect pulp capping, there was once upon a time, like I have discussed with you in your lecture on restorative dentistry, that there is no recommendation of re-entering the cavity to remove the carious dentine which we had left in the first appointment. Okay, so for us now the protocol is leave the carious dentine at the base of the cavity, cover it with calcium hydroxide, put a base of glass ionomer cement, and then restore the cavity with your posterior composite, and we are done. We are not going to touch that tooth ever again. Now we look at direct pulp capping. It is defined as a placement of a biocompatible material directly on the pulp, directly on the exposed pulp, okay, which could have occurred because of caries excavation or as a result of trauma. But you understand this, the prognosis is better if the pulp is exposed due to trauma, and the prognosis becomes poorer if the pulpal exposure has happened after caries excavation. So we'll look at this, how to have to increase the prognosis in when you're treating it. So rationally behind this treatment modality is to encourage the pulp to initiate the dentinal bridge through reparative dentine, and thus walling off the exposure site and maintaining the vitality of the underlying pulp. So indication, very important for us to understand, is direct pulp capping should be limited to only small pinpoint mechanical exposure which is less than 1 millimeter, and it has to be surrounded by sound dentine. Okay, now this kind of picture I always use in your OSCEs for to assess whether you understand this concept of pinpoint exposure and the surrounding of the exposure should be a sound dentine. Now this direct pulp capping is not recommended for primary teeth, okay, but you can do it for permanent teeth. But in primary teeth, it is advisable not to do it, but you can do it with MTA and biodentine. But when I ask you this question in the exam, you must give me both options. So recommendation not to perform direct pulp capping, but can be performed by using MTA, biodentine, and these materials are more biocompatible as compared to calcium hydroxide, which used to cause internal resorption in primary teeth. Alright, so let's get this clear. And the second criteria is the exposed pulp tissue should be bright red in color and slight hemorrhagic, which would be easy to control. This basically means that the tissue is vital, and the bright red color of the bleeding indicates that there is no infection in that area, there is no inflammation, and because there is no inflammation, the bleeding can be controlled easily by a moist cotton pellet. And third criteria is, if it is a traumatic exposure, it should happen in 1 to 2 hours. If the patient reports to you within 2 hours, then you can do direct pulp capping and the prognosis will be very good. Again, contraindications: any sign of irreversible pulp damage cannot do direct pulp capping. So should not be carried out if an exposure is found on removal of caries, as placement of medicament on inflamed pulp will ultimately lead to failure of the treatment. If there is a exposure of more than 1 millimeter, then you need to go to the next step, which is pulpotomy. If there is a history of spontaneous or nighttime pain associated with caries, then you have to look at pulpectomy for primary teeth and root canal treatment for the permanent teeth. And when you look at the permanent teeth, you will have to look at the development of the root apex. If it is formed, go for RCT. If it is not formed, you have to go for apexification or apexogenesis. Not apexogenesis, endodontic regeneration. Okay, and then you also have to look at the bleeding at the exposure site. If it is excessive and cannot be controlled by placement of moist cotton pellet, then better go for pulpotomy or pulpectomy. Okay, now remember, less commonly used in the direct pulp capping in primary teeth is less commonly used as there is increased inflammatory response. Remember, we discussed the primary pulp is got a high vascularity and the inflammatory response is very high, and there is high incidence of internal resorption, and therefore it is sometimes contraindicated in primary teeth. So direct pulp capping, as a rule of thumb, is contraindicated in primary teeth. Then very important to place the final restoration on that visit itself. Don't try to give zinc oxide eugenol or a temporary restoration to assess the tooth later. You have to have a very good seal, and that seal will come only if you place the final restoration at the same appointment. That means composite restoration at the same appointment as you put your biocompatible material over the pulp. Okay, like for example calcium hydroxide, hard setting calcium hydroxide. So final restoration in the same appointment. Now formation of reparative dentine is a slow healing process, and it begins in less than 19 days with subsequent average daily deposition of the reparative dentine at 1.4 micrometers a day, and this will take about 6 to 8 weeks to see radiographically something has happened to the dentine which was under the pulp exposure, and maybe after 3 months you may see a calcific barrier on the radiograph. So this is a very slow process, so we have to keep the patient on a regular follow-up. These are some of the medicaments that are used for direct pulp capping. Calcium hydroxide, the Dical, this is hard setting calcium hydroxide. It's radio opaque and can be visualized on the radiograph very easily. Then you have mineral trioxide aggregate, MTA. We have we have this in our clinic. So this is more of now becoming a gold standard, MTA. And we also have newer materials like biodentine, though it is not a very new one, but remember we have biodentine, and there will be more materials coming in. So you have to understand that what these materials do on the exposed pulp. For example, calcium hydroxide will irritate the pulp, and this irritation of the pulp, which cause inflammation of the pulp, which will cause necrosis of that part of the pulp. And the reparative, remember, we will have reparative dentinogenesis like we discussed in the morning. So the intensity of inflammation for calcium hydroxide is very high, which will instigate the pulp to form your tertiary dentine. Then you have mineral trioxide aggregate. This will basically itself form a barrier. It itself becomes a barrier and protects the remaining pulp, and the vitality of the pulp is maintained. And similarly, it goes for biodentine as well. So these are some pulp capping agents that we use for permanent dentition and in very selected primary dentition. So with this, we end our topic on direct pulp capping and indirect pulp capping. We have looked at the indications of direct pulp capping. We have looked at the contraindications of direct pulp capping, and similarly for indirect pulp capping, we have also looked at the formation of tertiary dentine, which is the reaction of pulp to different type of stimulus. So you have to remember that the difference between reparative dentine and reactive dentine and reparative dentine, and how it forms, what is the role of the intensity of inflammation there. Okay, and of course we looked at the different treatment options for primary teeth and permanent teeth. We also looked at the difference in reaction of pulp of a primary teeth and a permanent teeth. So all this information you have to keep in your mind when a case comes, with a tooth comes, a patient comes basically with a tooth with a deep caries lesion, and where you have to take a call and use your clinical decision making skills to arrive at a diagnosis and a treatment plan. So with this, I end this lecture, and the following lecture will be discussing on the pulpotomy and pulpectomy, which would be for cases which cannot be handled by direct pulp capping or indirect pulp capping. So till then, it is bye bye from me. Have a nice day.